What is your current hope or breakdown of the 49er wide receiver room? Okay? And just to catch everybody up, sort of why we're talking about this, I think most of you kind of gather it all. But Brandon Aiyuk is officially a holdout as of today. Mandatory camp, he's not there. There's no surprise there. Christian McCaffrey gets some extra money and extra years put onto his deal, not a lot. Doesn't have anything to do with each other because it's a way less complex deal at a completely different position. But I think we all sort of know the score. There were a lot of trade rumors around the two big-name wide receivers with the 49ers. Since the draft and all of those trade rumors, here's what we know. Okay? The draft has happened. The 49ers picked not one but two wide receivers. They got Cowing also. Was that round 4, I think? Round 4 for Cowing, the other wide receiver they got? I think it was round 4. Anyway, whatever. Pearsall, round 1. Cowing, round 4. 2 wide receivers are new. Jawan Jennings gets his contract. He is in. Okay? So there's that. And Deebo Samuel reports to camp and says this when asked if he had heard all of the trade rumors around the draft.
Yeah, I heard it. Had a conversation with my agent about it. That was going back and forth with whoever it was. But it was a thing at first. But, we done moved past it. So we're here to get better.
It was a thing at first. Talked to my agent. We done moved past it. We're here. We're ready to go. Okay. So there's that. And the Aiyuk thing is going to continually be interesting because of the fact that wide receiver money is just a big national story right now. Not just the Amon-Ra's and the Jalen Waddles. There's Justin Jefferson with the big old bang that just completely blows the whole thing out of water.
Mike Breen bang.
Right? The highest guarantee was Tyreek Hill, just over $50 million, and Justin comes out and gets 88. I mean, it's absurd. No comp whatsoever. So what happens now with the wide receivers who are still talking? Check this out from our buddy Mike Silver with the San Francisco Chronicle. He sent this tweet. I think it's just dripping with intrigue. He writes, very short version of where things stand with the 49ers and their receivers. Number 1, they drafted Pearsall in the first round. He's a big part of the present and future. Okay? Number 2, if Aiyuk ends up taking their best offer, Deebo will be gone after 2024. Number 3, if Aiyuk doesn't take their best offer and presumably plays on the 5th-year option, it's Hunger Games between him and Deebo to see who stays beyond 2024. And finally, number 4, there is still a chance Aiyuk or Deebo could be traded between now and the November deadline if the offer's good enough and or if things have devolved with Aiyuk. All right. What's your breakdown there? What do you hear? What do you think's going to happen?
Well, for me, the thumbnail takeaway is that at the end of next year, Deebo Samuel is going to be gone. That's the way I've looked at it in a number of different ways, and the way he breaks that down, that of his 4 points seems the most likely. The least likely to me is that Deebo or Brandon gets traded before the deadline. This team is looking to win. You've got 2 receivers who have played winning football in your system, and you've already cleared up enough cap room so that you can make it through this entire season without having to worry about that. You're not a cash-poor team. I don't see that happening at all, and I also don't think that Brandon Aiyuk will play on the 5th-year option, and Michael Silver made it seem like that's not likely either. I don't think that it's going to get to that point where Brandon Aiyuk is going to come in and wind up playing on his 5th-year option.
What now? Why do you say that Silver sort of insinuates that he wouldn't play on the 5th-year option?
Read that item again.
If Aiyuk doesn't take their best offer and presumably plays on the 5th-year option,
right,
then it's Hunger Games between him and Deebo to see who stays with the team beyond.
I don't think that they want Hunger Games. And
I don't think that they want it, but I guess
I guess he's presuming that he would play on the 5th-year option, and I don't think that he would play on the 5th-year option.
I totally think he'd play on the 5th-year option. I think he'd be furious about it, but I think he'd do it because what the hell's the win in him not doing it?
Right. I guess I just think that they'll settle before it comes to that.
I do too.
Because they don't want, and I like the way he laid that out with the the Hunger Games option. I think it was Suzanne Collins who wrote the books, and all I can picture is Katniss Everdeen right now, and Aiyuk is shooting arrows at Debo in practice, and they don't want a Hunger Games-like scenario to play out.
Nobody wants that.
Right.
Nobody wants Brandon Aiyuk to not be on the team this year, and nobody wants him to be mad. But I do think if it gets to that, I hope people understand there's a very big difference between holding out in camp and holding out into the season. You start losing big dollars, and you run the risk of losing it's a different word in football than it is in baseball, but you essentially lose your service time, and you don't get credit for the year on your contract. You come back next year in the exact same situation. So there's no win for Brandon in that. And again, I'll remind you, you asked TJ Houshmandzadeh about this a few months ago, and he said there's no way in hell he's showing up to camp. But what about the season?
I'm not going to like it. I'm going to be pissed off for a little bit, and then I'm going to get my ass to work and go dominate another year. Now you're going to pay me more than you would have had paid me the year before. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be pissed off, and then I'm going to go bust my you-know-what, run myself into the ground in the offseason, get better, come back and dominate, and now there's no, can you take it? Nah, I'm taking everything that I deserve, and that should be his mentality. It's natural to be upset. It's natural. But once you don't get it, you got to put your head down and get to work, because if you don't play well, it will be, that's why we made that decision. And so, yeah, it should upset you, but you can't let it affect you. It should upset you, but don't let it affect you at all. Get to work and come back and have a better year.
Yeah, see, I think he'd be there. It's not like it's offensive for him to play for $14 million next year. That's number one. And number two, sometimes I laugh when people are like, oh, gosh, you don't want him playing angry. All football players play angry. That's literally what they do.
Especially those wide receivers,
exactly.
They play angry.
My God, who the hell goes out in the football field and is like, it's really nice to be here. It's good. And you want to tackle each other. We'll
George Kittle does. Hey, George, I'm also George.
And he's a nut job.
Excuse me while I don't pursue that fumble. Isn't that cool? You're George and I'm George. That was the Super Bowl, right?
That didn't go well for him.
That's a bad beat.
He didn't
Getting
know.
mic'd up. I do think that you're playing a little bit of a risky game. If Brandon Aiyuk does come in and play on that fifth-year option and he does ball out like TJ Houshmandzadeh would recommend to him that he does, if I'm Brandon Aiyuk, I'm saying deuces. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to take my free agency elsewhere.
But you got to be there long enough to even gain free agency. If you don't show up, you don't get to be a free agent.
That's the point of him coming in on the fifth-year option.
Yes.
And I'm not going to cry in my Cheerios over him getting $14 million, because that's a nice payday for 1 year. It's not what Debo's making. It's about half of what Debo's making. But if Brandon does go out and have a year like he did last year, well, now on the free agent market, he's going to get a whole lot more. And if I'm him, I'm saying bye-bye to the 49ers.
Well, I agree with your original statement. I see this the same way, in that the likeliest way this plays out is that Aiyuk and the Niners have a deal sometime, probably, I would guess, in the month of August. I would think that the two sides come to a deal. Brandon's going to be a very, very highly paid receiver, and it will make sense for Debo Samuel to be let go after the 2024 season, not because anybody doesn't like Debo or not that he's not worth his money. But I think something that has happened in this process with the way that it's going is that people are viewing Ricky Pearsall being drafted as like a threat. They drafted him to be like, hey, you better sign your contract because we drafted Ricky Pearsall, or, hey, we got to draft Ricky because we might trade one of these guys. I don't think any of that has anything to do with drafting Ricky Pearsall. I said it at the time. I think drafting Ricky Pearsall is much more about 2025 than it is about 2024. He's a very good player. The early returns in practice have been exactly what you want them to be as far as who he is and what he looks like on a football field. You don't use a first-round draft pick on a threat. You use a first-round draft pick on someone you are planning to feature. And so I look at it that way. Debo Samuel and Brandon Aiyuk, very likely beyond this year, can't both be on the team because you will be blocking a first-round draft pick. And unless the 49ers assess after this year that Ricky ain't what they thought he was, then they're going to want Ricky to play. and they're going to want him to play for a lot cheaper than what Debo and Brandon will be able to do. And he'll be well before his 30th birthday while Debo approaches his and might be hurt again, and all of the things that happen with Debo Samuel. So I think that they know exactly what their likely play out is. I think they knew that it was unlikely that they were going to trade either guy, and I think that they know right now that it's likely they're going to sign Brandon, and they also know right now it's very likely that Debo Samuel will play his last year with the 49ers, because then it will be Ricky's time.
Well, ideally, you get to the end of this upcoming year and you have that problem. And hopefully you have won a Super Bowl and then you have that problem and you look at it and you say, well, we've got more receivers than we know what to do with. And at that point, Debo is going to be making too much and Aiyuk's deal is going to really be kicking in, because this year his $14 million hit would go down to $7 million if you gave him an extension. So next year, presumably Aiyuk's number would jump up above 27, maybe 28, even approaching 30, depending on how they structure it. So next year, that would be the kind of problem that it would be hard to say goodbye to Debo, but if that's the choice, because Ricky Pearsall is still good and Juwan is a contributor, and maybe, you've got Jacob Cowing, who's your fourth or fifth guy, and, Ronnie and Danny are both gone. Whatever the case is, you feel good enough about the wide receiver room that you can then make that decision. The worst thing would be if Brandon Aiyuk doesn't sign, he plays his fifth-year option, and Ricky Pearsall turns out to not be that good. Then you might end up losing Brandon Aiyuk as a free agent. Well, Pearsall's not the sauce. You're paying Debo a bunch. At that point, it would be a risk that didn't pay off.
Another offseason where you could address it, though, if that's the case.
Sure.
And you still have Jennings now for multiple years. I think Jennings is a perfect fit with what he already does. I don't think elevating him in the pecking order is ever really in the plans. I think third down, big possession receiver, I think that's who he is. I think he knows it. I think that's why he signed. I think that's how the Niners always see him. I think they would like Ricky Pearsall to be their number 2 in 2025. If he shows that he's ready for that, great. If not, there are other ways to address it in the offseason without doing it for $28, $29 million on a 30-year-old Debo. I love the guy too, but this is just part of the deal. This is part of the process with the NFL. It's constantly calling for you to regenerate at each position, and you watch NFL teams do it all over the place all the time. We already talked earlier about how they're doing it at cornerback right now as well. They did it at quarterback. They did it in a clunky way because it didn't work out the way they were trying to have it happen, but that's what they did. They're like, time to get cheaper at quarterback. We think we can get the same production for a lot less. They were wrong. Poof, 7th round, saved their butts. But you're constantly doing that. Here's an interesting question. 408 sends it in on the text line. Does the 49ers potentially winning the Super Bowl this year change how the team may keep Debo and Aiyuk? Here's how I'd answer it. I think it does change the future for Debo and Aiyuk if they win the Super Bowl this year. I think it makes it even easier to move on from Debo Samuel. I don't think that's how our listener was asking it.
Right.
If you're asking, does winning the Super Bowl make it more likely they keep both? I think no. I think if you win a Super Bowl this year, I think all the pressure just falls off. All of the pressure falls off. Now you're truly a great regime because you've been competitive every year. You've been largely smart. Now you've been proven to be a champion as well. Debo's about to turn 30, and you're like, yeah, cost of doing business. It's time to move on. Debo, we love you.
Yeah.
Wave into the sunset. Here's your ring. You'll be back someday as an all-time great, but it's time for us to get younger and cheaper at the position.
Cheaper, yeah, for sure cheaper. And you've already gotten younger with Cowing, and you've got Pearsall, who, if both turn out to be good players, then you've gotten younger and you've gotten cheaper. And that's what you have to do at every position. And the old Bill Walsh adage of you want to get rid of a guy a year too early as opposed to a year too late, it is a cliche, but it's also the way smart teams go about doing business. And you really don't want to be a team that gets caught behind the 8 ball, even if you do have success. And, it's not likely that they win the Super Bowl. They're one of a handful of 6 to 8 teams who you'd say have a pretty good shot at it. But no matter how you do it, I agree with you that the writing is kind of on the wall as far as that position and how much you want to pay.
here's the other thing I wanted to say about the tweet that we just read from Mike Silver that's got the 4 tiers of possibilities with the future of the wide receiver position. There's 2 things that popped to mind when I read this. First, take it on its face value, and go, okay, here, read what Mike said. Here are the possibilities. Here's the other thing that popped into my head. This is open social media negotiating tactics by the 49ers. Now, I have no idea who anybody's sources are, but I do think that when you read things on social media, you largely can figure out who's talking to who. The national guys tend to talk to who? The agents. That's why when Adam Schefter breaks the Christian McCaffrey news, right at the bottom, the last sentence is, the deal was negotiated.
That's pretty good.
By WME Sports. He got this from Joel Siegel. That's Christian McCaffrey's agent. You can also tell, and largely the people who are local and beat writers largely are talking to team representatives. Yes, they talk to agents too. They are also dialed in. But I think you can feel, when you read this, you can feel that the 49ers are speaking to one of their media members and getting their narrative out to the public. Because read the way that it's written. Number 2, if Aiyuk ends up taking their best offer, Debo's gone after 2024. Right. Number 3, if Aiyuk doesn't take their best offer, then it's play on your 5th-year option and we'll see what happens. And oh, by the way, before I go, either one of y'all could still get traded.
Yeah, there is a trade deadline.
That is directly from the 49er negotiating sort of side of this window. If you're like, what would they say to Brandon's agent? Here's our best offer.
Yep.
Would you like to take it and be the new guy here and say, oh, you don't? Okay, then we'll play on your 5th-year option. And boy, I hope you don't get traded.
Yeah, because it could happen.
We could do that.
I don't think he has a no-trade clause. Is there such a thing in the NFL?
I don't.
Because I know in the NBA, there's only a few guys who have it, including Bradley Beal out of nowhere.
Oh, what the hell was
Bradley
that?
Beal's got a no trade. I think that's unheard of in the NFL.
Worst contract in the NBA by far.
And he's got the no trade.
That's part of it.
Well, the number's
also terrible.
Exactly. Not to get off track.